The last thing my mother said before they left me wasn't a warning, and it wasn't goodbye. The last thing I heard from her was laughter. Her laugh. The one that always felt a little too loud, a little too comfortable with my discomfort, drifted through the rest stop bathroom door just before I heard tires on wet pavement and understood what was happening. I came out to an empty parking bay. The gray Toyota Sequoia that had carried us north from Mississauga since 9 that morning was gone. My mother was gone, my stepfather was gone. My brother and my younger sister were gone. Where their car had sat, rain fell through an October sky and collected in oil-slicked puddles on the asphalt. The trees lining the Highway 400 service center shivered in a wind that had already pulled half their leaves down. I stood there in the doorway of that concrete bathroom, wearing a thin hoodie that belonged to a warmer season, holding nothing. My phone was dead, my wallet was in my bag. My bag was in the trunk of the car that was now somewhere north of Barrie, carrying people who were probably, at that exact moment, laughing. I knew even then that they were laughing. My brother had said it 3 weeks earlier at a dinner I wasn't supposed to overhear. He'd been talking to my mother in the kitchen while I was still on the stairs, and his voice carried in the way it always did when he was proud of something he thought was clever. "She'll call within 2 hours, he'd said. "She'll be sobbing. I'll bet you 500 on it." My mother had laughed that laugh. "She doesn't even know what the real world looks like," she'd said. "This'll be good for her." Good for me. A highway rest stop in late October in Ontario, 90 minutes north of where I'd grown up, no phone, no money, no coat, 18 degrees dropping to 8 by nightfall. Good for me. I was 26 years old, and until that moment standing in the parking lot while transport trucks shook the air around me, I had spent my entire life believing they were protecting me. Every time my mother told me I was too emotional, I thought she was trying to help. Every time my brother made a joke at my expense and said I needed to learn to take one, I believed him. Every time my stepfather went quiet instead of standing up for me and called it staying neutral, I convinced myself that was just how families worked. I thought the cage was a home. Standing there, with October rain starting to soak through my hoodie, I finally understood it was never protection. It was management. They had managed me, carefully and deliberately, into someone who needed them. They expected me to fall apart within the hour. They were wrong about almost everything, but they were right about one thing. I had no idea how to do this alone. I walked to the edge of the service road and looked in both directions. Northbound traffic blurred past without slowing. Southbound, same. The service center held a closed food kiosk and bathrooms about to be locked for the season. There was no OPP cruiser in the parking lot. Nobody who looked like they were staying long enough to help. I thought briefly about asking someone to borrow their phone, but I realized I didn't know any of my family's numbers by memory. Everything lived in a device sitting dead at the bottom of a trunk that was already somewhere near Gravenhurst. I made a decision without being sure it was the right one. I started walking south along the shoulder. The gravel was loose and uneven. The wind from passing transport trucks hit like a wall each time one went by, close enough to feel the air pressure shift against my face. I kept my arms wrapped around myself and tried not to think about how dark it would get by 5:30. I tried to think about the road. Just the road. I don't know how long I'd been walking before the truck slowed beside me. I moved further onto the shoulder instinctively, but the rig eased to a stop and the driver's window came down. The man leaning out was somewhere in his 50s, gray at his temples, a coffee thermos wedged between his seat and the door. He looked at my wet clothes and my empty hands with an expression that wasn't pity exactly, but something quieter and more careful than that. He asked if I needed a lift south. He said his name was Doug. He was hauling building supplies down to Newmarket and had a 2-seat cab. I stood there for a moment in the rain, measuring the risk against the cold and the math of how far I had to go. Then I got in. Doug didn't ask me to explain myself. He turned the heat up without saying anything about it and handed me a thermal travel mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm, but was still better than nothing. For a long time we didn't talk at all, just the sound of the engine and the wipers and the rain on the windshield. Then he reached into the side pocket of his door and pulled out a small hardcover notebook, the kind with a cloth cover and an elastic band, the kind you find at a Dollarama near the school supplies. He set it on the console between us. "I've got 3 more of those at home," he said. "Every time something happens to me that I think I won't be able to get through, I write it down." He paused. Turns out I got through all of them. He left me at the Barrie South Service Center 40 minutes later. I had his jacket over my hoodie. the notebook in my hand, and the stubby pencil he'd pulled from behind his ear as an afterthought. He waved once and pulled back into traffic without waiting to see which way I went. I stood under the awning and opened to the first page and wrote the date and time. Then I wrote, "I am here, I am still standing." It didn't feel true yet. But something about writing it down made it harder to argue with. The Barrie South Tim Hortons was half full with the late afternoon rush. Contractors in muddy work boots, families stopping on their way to somewhere else, a group of teenagers taking up too much space near the window. I walked in soaking wet with a stranger's jacket hanging off my shoulders and stood in line for a full minute before I remembered I had no money. I stepped out of line and stood off to the side, not sure what to do with my face. A woman behind the counter caught my eye. She had braided hair pulled back under her visor, and she was watching me with the same careful look Doug had used on the highway, like she was doing a quiet calculation before deciding anything. She was somewhere around my age, maybe a few years older. Her name tag said Patrice. She came around the counter during her break and sat down across from me in a corner booth, without asking whether I wanted company. She set a large double-double and a chicken wrap in front of me and told me they were on her. I said I couldn't accept that. She said, "Yes, you can, take it." So I did. Patrice listened while I talked in the scattered, exhausted way you talk when you've been trying to hold everything compressed for hours. I told her about the parking lot, the empty spot where the car had been, the sound I made when I understood what had happened. Not a scream, not crying, just a sound like something letting go. She didn't try to finish my sentences or offer explanations for why people do the things they do to the people who trust them. She just listened, and when I stopped, she was quiet for a moment before she said anything. "My mother used to tell me I was too needy," she said. "For about 15 years I believed her. Then I figured out that needing things is just being human. Some people don't like it when you're human around them." I looked down at the notebook in my hands. The coffee was warm, and the wrap was something I hadn't realized how badly I needed. Outside, the October dark was starting to press against the windows. She let me charge my dead phone at the staff outlet for 20 minutes before her break ended. It got to 9%. 9% was enough to check the bus schedule and understand that the last bus south had already left, and the next one wasn't until 6 in the morning. I didn't have money for a motel. I didn't have money for anything. Patrice had already gone back behind the counter, but she glanced over once. I gave her a small nod that I hoped said something like "I'll figure it out." I wasn't certain that was true. I wrote in the notebook while my phone charged. I wrote about the rain and about Doug's jacket and about what my brother had said 3 weeks ago. And then, without planning to, I started writing about older things. The time I was 17 and spent a summer saving babysitting money to buy a bus ticket to visit a friend in Ottawa, and my mother went through my room, found the envelope, and moved it into the household account for safekeeping, and then seemed to forget it was there. The time I was 20 and got a job offer in Halifax, and my stepfather sat me down and explained, very calmly and reasonably, all the ways it was too risky, too far, too uncertain for someone like me, and I believed him and turned it down. The way my brother would tell stories at family dinners that were always about something I'd done wrong, or believed that was wrong, and everyone would laugh. And I would laugh too, because I thought that was what you did. I had laughed. For nearly a decade I had laughed. The memory that came back hardest wasn't a dramatic one. It was ordinary and small, and that's probably why it hurt the most. A family road trip when I was 22. A gas station somewhere on the 17. My brother drove away from the pump while I was still inside paying, and by the time I came out the car was 50 meters down the road with everyone in it laughing. I had to run. My mother watched from the passenger seat and said I needed to develop a thicker skin. I had laughed about it by the time I got back in the car, because I thought the only way to belong was to agree that nothing hurt. I put down the pencil and pressed my hands flat on the table for a moment. A couple came into the Tim Hortons around 7 in the evening. They looked to be in their late 60s. He had the kind of face that had spent years outdoors, wind-weathered and steady, and she walked with a slight lean against him, the way of people who have been moving together long enough that the movement itself has become a habit. They ordered decaf and muffins and sat 2 booths over. After a while the woman glanced at me and said something quietly to her husband. He came over and asked, with the straightforward politeness of someone from a small community who sees no reason to complicate a simple thing, whether I was all right. His name was Leonard, his wife's name was June. They were from Aurelia, heading back after visiting their daughter in Toronto. They listened to the short version of what had happened, with the attention of people who have seen enough of life to know that strange things happen to ordinary people, and that the right response is not to interrogate it, but to help. June insisted on paying for the motel across the road. She went to the front desk herself and paid cash while Leonard sat with me and talked about nothing important. The weather, the highway, his grandchildren learning to skate this season. When she came back with the room key, she folded my hand around it and squeezed once, briefly. "Get some sleep," she said. "Things look different in the morning." She wasn't wrong, exactly, but the motel room was the kind of quiet that has edges to it. I lay on top of the coverlet in Doug's jacket and stared at the ceiling, and let everything that had been compressed all day start moving through me properly. I thought about a backyard barbecue in August. My mother's backyard, paper plates, the smell of charcoal, mosquitoes in the long grass along the fence. I felt included that afternoon. My brother was funny in a way that didn't target anyone, and the evening was warm, and for a few hours I convinced myself I'd been reading things wrong all along. I'd driven home, thinking maybe the problem was mine, not theirs. Maybe I just needed to stop being so aware of everything. But walking on a gravel shoulder in the rain had cleared something out, and lying in that motel room, I finally let myself see what I'd been refusing to, that the good days were part of the same system as the bad ones. They needed me to feel included often enough that I'd stay, uncertain enough that I'd doubt myself, and grateful enough that I'd confuse gratitude for love. The warmth and the cruelty ran off the same engine. I just hadn't wanted to look at the engine. I picked up the notebook and wrote that down before I could lose it. Sleep came eventually, shallow and broken. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps in the hall outside slow down and stop near my door, and my whole body went rigid until they moved on. I lay awake afterward for a long time, listening to the highway in the rain, a vending machine humming somewhere down the corridor. My phone battery had drained back to 3%. I turned it off. In the morning, the sky was flat and gray and 4 degrees colder than the day before. I asked the motel office for directions south and started walking along the secondary road that ran parallel to the highway. My feet had gone past sore into something duller and more general. The farm stand was on a concession road, the kind of small operation you see all over rural Ontario in late autumn. A folding table under a canopy, late-season squash, bags of apples, a few jugs of cider, run by a woman who clearly had a dozen other things to do but was there anyway. Her name was Loretta. She had short silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and when I stopped to rest, she handed me a bag of Macintosh apples without waiting to be asked. "You look like someone who's been walking longer than they planned," she said. I gave her the short version. She was quiet for a moment, rearranging a row of butternut squash with hands that moved from long habit. "Some people keep their kids small," she said finally. "It's not always cruelty, though it looks like it from the outside. Sometimes it's that they're afraid of what you'd become if you grew." She looked at me. "But afraid or not, it's still a cage." I took one photograph of her with my phone before the battery died. She was looking somewhere past the camera, not posed, not performing, just present in the way of someone who has no reason to pretend. That was the image I wanted, a face that had seen things and wasn't trying to make them into something else. She pointed me toward the nearest town, where I could board a southbound bus. The ride took just under 2 hours. I sat by the window with the notebook on my lap, and watched Ontario move past, farmland and Canadian Shield, and then suburb thickening into city, the Mississauga skyline appearing through rain-streaked glass like a question I'd been avoiding my whole life. My hands were cold inside Doug's jacket, my feet ached, I had no plan beyond what I was about to do. The walk from the terminal to my mother's house took 45 minutes. I knew every block of it. I had learned to ride my bike on that route, walked home from school on it for 4 years, returned to it every time I'd tried to leave and been pulled back by the gravitational weight of being told I couldn't manage without them. The car was in the driveway. The kitchen light was on. I opened the door without knocking because I had never needed to knock. The kitchen went silent the moment I walked in. My mother, my stepfather, my brother, my younger sister, arranged around the table in the way of people who have been waiting without admitting they were waiting. My brother had his phone face down in front of him. My stepfather looked at the wall. My mother's expression moved through several things very quickly before settling on something that was trying to look like relief. I didn't say anything right away. I put the notebook on the table and opened it flat and started turning pages. The date and time, written in pencil in a rest stop parking lot while rain soaked through my hoodie. The names: Doug, Barrie South Service Center, Highway 400. Patrice, Tim Hortons, 9% phone battery. Leonard and June Aurelia, the motel room key. Loretta, Concession Road, Macintosh Apples, 47 kilometers one night. My handwriting across every page, evidence of a night and a day they had designed to break me. When I looked up, the kitchen was absolutely still. You lost, I said. I didn't call. I didn't fall apart. I'm standing in this kitchen, and I walked and I buzzed and I got here on my own, and you lost. My mother started to speak. She got 3 words out before I held up my hand. I know what you're about to say, that it was a joke, that I'm being too sensitive, that this is exactly what you were talking about. I kept my voice level, not because I wasn't angry. I was enormously and cleanly angry, the way you can only be when you've finally stopped being confused, but because the anger didn't need to be loud to be real. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not coming back. My brother started talking over me the way he always had. My mother's hands were shaking. My stepfather looked up from the wall and opened his mouth and then closed it again without producing anything useful, which was consistent with his entire contribution to my life. My younger sister sat with her arms around herself and said nothing, but she looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read, something that might, in a different version of this story, become understanding. I had kept a bag at a friend's place in Etobicoke. I had packed it 6 weeks earlier during a period of clarity I hadn't trusted enough to act on at the time. My SIN card, my health card, the bank card my mother didn't know about, a few changes of clothes. It wasn't much. It was enough. If anyone tells a different version of what happened, I said at the door, I have their names: the truck driver, the woman at the Tim Hortons, the couple from Aurelia, the woman at the farm stand. I have the dates, the times, and what they saw. I picked up the notebook, and I'm keeping this. My mother said my name. The tone she used was familiar. The one she'd always used to pull the story back towards something she could manage, to make what had just happened mean something other than what it meant. I had heard that tone my entire life. I closed the door. The night air outside was cold and clean and completely ungoverned by anyone else's version of who I was supposed to be. A few houses down, a porch light came on automatically in the dark. Somewhere on the next street, a dog barked once and then stopped. I took the bus to my friend's place. I let myself in with a spare key and sat on the couch in the dark for a while, not sleeping, not crying, just present inside the quiet of a space where no one was going to come through a door and tell me I was too much or not enough. The notebook was on my lap. I opened it to the last written page and added one more line before I closed it. I made it. Not for them. The weeks that followed were not simple. Untangling a life from the people who built themselves into its architecture takes longer than one night and one very long walk. There were phone calls I had to stop taking, conversations I had to stop explaining myself inside of. There were mornings in my friend's spare room when my mother's voice came back in my head. You're too sensitive. You can't handle things. You'll never manage on your own. And I had to choose, deliberately and consciously, not to believe her. But I had the notebook. I would read it when I needed to remember what was actually true. 2% battery and a stranger's Macintosh apple and a Tim Hortons cup still warm when I wrapped both hands around it. A couple from Aurelia who didn't need to know my whole story to know I needed help. A truck driver who understood that sometimes what you need most is someone to tell you to write things down. They had bet I would break before I made it back. The highway held, so did I. What they took, the car, the phone, the comfort of believing I was too fragile to survive without them. None of it stayed gone for long. What stayed was the notebook. What stayed was the 47 kilometers. What stayed was the exact, specific knowledge that I had already survived the worst thing they could think to do to me, and that I had survived it without becoming anyone other than myself. That is not a small thing to know about yourself. It is, as it turns out, almost everything.